Well, we're going to have an interesting speaker series tonight. My name is Bart Ney, and I am the, well, it says I'm the Bay Bridge Public Information Officer. So that's one of my titles. Communications Manager for the Toll Bridge Program, take your pick. But I'm the spokesperson for the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge. And this is the second in a series of speaking events that we're doing to try and bring some of the people that are responsible for building the new bridge out to the public and discuss some of the key components for how we're delivering it during the time period that we're actually constructing it. So, next slide. So this is this series is being sponsored by the Toll Bridge Program Oversight Committee. And that is a group that's been formed out of the California Department of Transportation, the Bay Area Toll Authority, and the California Transportation Commission. So the TBPOC here is the entity that's responsible for delivering the Bay Bridge into public service. Right now, we're currently scheduled to open it Labor Day weekend 2013. And next. And the lecture series, Joseph Nicoletti actually retired this year. He had 20 years of public service, 40 years of private service in the engineering field. He served on many different advisory panels, including our own seismic advisory panel. And he had just an amazing amount of influence over the process and helped our team really deliver this bridge. And we thought it would be great to honor him with this effort to bring the people that are actually working on the bridge out to the public unfiltered to discuss how we're actually getting it built and allow for a little Q&A after the presentation so you can bring your questions directly to us. As you can see, the event tonight is being filmed and it'll be playing on baybridgeinfo.org after we complete the series. There are two other Joseph P. Nicoletti speaker series scheduled coming up in January and also in February. So be watching for that. You can also see the previous engineering-based speaker series on our website at baybridgeinfo.org. So tonight, we are going to be focusing on bridge design and aesthetics, architecture. And there are many, many different stories to delivering this bridge. We focused last time, again, on engineering principles and maintenance. And tonight, we're really going to get into the aesthetics. We have three great architects that are here with us tonight to explain a little bit of what went into the different design elements of this bridge. There are a couple of things to keep in mind with the Bay Bridge. It's a very unique project. There are really three things that set it apart from any other infrastructure project that's come before it. First and foremost, on the engineering side, it's seismic performance. The reason why we're here tonight discussing this project is because the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989 dropped a span at Pier E9 and made us rethink where we were with our seismic design for our large bridges. And that began a process of us determining, what we really needed to do out here on the bay. And we've talked before a little bit about the engineering of what makes this bridge special. It's one of the key first things. The second thing is that we've had to replace this bridge while we keep 280,000 vehicles running across it every day. The Bay Bridge is one of the busiest bridges in the nation. And that has been an extreme challenge for us. We've had to build detours. There have only been a couple of times when we've taken the bridge out of service because we've literally had to shift traffic from one structure to another. So we put a lot of effort in keeping the motoring public going across the bay while we bring seismic safety to this particular crossing. And the third thing is what we're here to talk about tonight, and that's aesthetics. And hopefully this talk is going to show you how special this bridge is from a design standpoint. We're really looking to inspire the next generation of architects, of engineers, of scientists, and tradespeople with what can actually be done here as we cross the bay.
The original bridge design from 1997 would have been simpler, cheaper, and faster to build, but it was ridiculed as a freeway on stilts and rejected by the Bay Area.
Help me understand why it was so important to people here that the bridge look nice.
Whatever we built out there would have to meet very exacting seismic standards. Whatever we built would have cost billions of dollars. So why not build something beautiful? Why not build something inspiring?
That's what we're here to talk about tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so speaking with us tonight are Michael Fitzpatrick from Lin International. He's going to give us a little bit of background on the original design concepts. Donald MacDonald from Donald MacDonald Architects. He is going to talk a little bit specifically about the design aspects and where we really came up with the ideas of what this bridge looks like and how it's translated over the different mega projects that make up the corridor of the Bay Bridge. And our very own Clive Endress, Senior Landscape Architect, and so much more than that, who's sort of followed the project from concept all the way to delivery today. So these three gentlemen are going to be presenting today. I'll also be moderating a little bit in the Q&A later. But they aren't the only ones that have contributed to the design of this bridge. In a lot of ways, you cannot divorce the engineering from the architecture of this structure because it is so unique. And we have had other design professionals, you'll hear some of their names tonight as these gentlemen speak, that have been key contributors to what we ultimately have out there. So I'd like to ask Michael Fitzpatrick to come on up and begin our presentation.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming out. Thank you very much for coming out in this weather and everything. Can we go to the next slide, please? I'm going to be talking about mostly the early design stuff, pre-proposal work, and the cable stay design. A lot of you probably haven't seen the cable stay bridge design or what happened in the early design phase. This project has been going on for more than a year. So some of the information that I'm going to be showing you actually has never been seen before. And as Bart talked about the models out front, are some of the models we built during the early design process back in 1997, 1998. So a little bit of a brief history. I think Bart covered most of all of this. Loma Prieta and Pier E9. If I don't know if you know this, but when you go across the Bay Bridge and right before you get to the truss, the little decks that are concrete, that's Pier E9. That's the ones that fell in. And so every time that I drive across it, I know that which pier fell, and that's Pier E9. So that's how you can tell which one fell down. So Caltrans, as Bart talked about, submitted some designs, and they weren't really widely accepted. And so then people started submitting some really crazy and wild designs, and I'm going to show you some of those. And then, can you hear me? Okay, great. And then I'm going to go into a little bit about the Engineering Design Advisory Panel that was set up by Caltrans to help the selection process that we've gone through. If we can go to the next one, that'd be great. So that's Pier E9, and that's where it fell. So when you go across it, you can see where that was replaced. And during the early design process, 1997, 1998, this image showed up a lot, because it's a seismic safety project, and we wanted to make sure that this didn't happen again. So yes, the aesthetics are important, but also the functionality was very important. And so everyone involved in the project back then saw this image a lot. Next slide, please. And this is similar to what Bart had shown about the Caltrans solution that was showed that didn't really get a lot of great support. And so, we can go to the next slide. Caltrans started getting a lot of designers submitting ideas. This is a professor from Berkeley. A lot of the designs I'm going to show you, some of them you're okay to chuckle if you want to. They're going to be kind of funny. But most of them did not work structurally. This one is a very interesting design, but would never work in a high seismic zone. We can go to the next one. This one is one of my favorites. It's both an arch and arches, and the whole reason why we have a main span is so ships can get through, and there's really no place for the ships to get through. So they get funnier. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Yeah, try looking at this one for a while. This is not an alligator, by the way. I think that's Yerba Buena Island. And so I don't know what to say about this one. So we could go to the next one. This one was very interesting because the designer wanted to put a single tower in the middle of the bay. This is Yerba Buena Island, and this is the west span over here. It's a great idea, but one of the reasons why we have the main span, and as you'll see, the main span is right about here, is because the profile of the geography in the bay basically drops off to about 500 feet. And the soils are basically the consistency of motor oil. And so the reason why the suspension bridge doesn't go all the way across is because of the geology. And so the rock profile drops off here, and the main tower is supported in that bedrock. And so that's one of the reasons why one of a really large span. A lot of people ask why there wasn't more spans across the bay. and it really has to do with geology. There wasn't really geology to support a mega structure like this. It is actually a nice design, but the geology wouldn't work. Go to the next one. And then this is basically a copy of some of the nice bridges back east. A very Verrazano Narrows Bridge kind of looks like that. And so all these ideas, all these designs were coming in. And so Caltrans, we can go to the next slide. Caltrans set up an Engineering Design Advisory Panel, or EDAP. And EDAP came up with 17 recommendations that the designer, whoever Caltrans was going to select, had to satisfy. And I didn't list all 17, but the main ones were that the designer had to have 2 independent designs going on, a cable stay and a self-anchored suspension bridge. Also had to have 2 separate decks. The bridge had to have had pedestrian access, no, didn't have to have pedestrian access at that time. Had to be a lifeline structure, which meant within 3 hours after a major event, service vehicles like fire trucks, ambulance, all those sorts of things needed to be able to drive across the bridge. It had to be operational after a high seismic event. And the bridge was going to be built to the north, and it also had to accommodate future rail. A lot of people don't know, but the existing bridge was designed in case BART ever went across. It's actually designed to accommodate BART if it needed to be. How did it work? Well, it's very interesting to know that in 1997 and 1998, when all this was going on, the idea of having architects work on a mega bridge project in the United States really didn't happen. Engineers really liked to have the engineering process that they liked and not have architects come in and kind of muck up the process, and we heard that a lot. But the way that Caltrans set up the whole process was very context-sensitive design. And Federal Highway Administration had created a program called context-sensitive design, but the Bay Bridge process actually preceded that. And what it was is we would have landscape architects, engineers, geologists, lighting designers, environmentalists, all working together to find a solution. And a lot of the times, the different professions, the different disciplines had very different ideas of what should be done. And so it became a very interesting process. The architects, we would come up with some of the crazy things you saw in the beginning, and engineers would come up with things that were not very exciting. And so we were in a constant battle back and forth on how do we come up with the aesthetics. And so what I'm going to show you is actually now the development of the cable stay bridge. And I'm going to show you from pre-proposal, before the RFP was released, through the proposal images and up to 30% design. So if we can go to the next one, please. So for me, at the time, all cable stay bridges were essentially sticks. You had a tower either in between the roadways or on the outside of the roadways. I have to be really careful. Our chairman of the board designed this bridge in Germany in 1955, and if I told him it was just a stick, he wouldn't be really happy with me. But it is really just a kind of a stick with some cables in it. And for the most part, all cable stay bridges look like that. And it's not exciting. It doesn't evoke any kind of experience. It didn't have anything that was great to look at. I think, can we go to the next slide? I think it helps. So I started looking at the context of the bay. And obviously we want to look at the Golden Gate Bridge and the Bay Bridge and to see what they did. And the architects and engineers of the Bay Bridge, they created something that was basically form follows function. You have these diagonal braces above and below deck, but there's no embellishment. There's no character to it. It's pretty form follows function, which was fine for its day, but it's not that exciting. It's a beautiful bridge, but it's not really exciting. The Golden Gate Bridge, built after the Bay Bridge, actually, this is a very interesting photograph because you see from the deck up, all the trusses, they're all covered in architectural metal. It's not structural. You know, the architect wanted to develop the tower that created shadows, had effects during the different types of weather, different times of the year to evoke an emotion. But if you look below the deck, it's purely form follows function. You know, and so this architectural skin creates kind of the excitement. So then I was thinking, well, how do you do that with a cable stay bridge? So can we go to the next slide, please? I wanted the cable stay bridge to have an experience. You know, if when you're driving on the existing Bay Bridge, let's say from Oakland into San Francisco, you're on the top deck, and at first you're on the deck, and then you're in the truss, and then you're in the main span truss, and then you're in the tunnel, and then you're in the space of the main cables, and it's all very interesting. It's a perceived procession of spaces. If you're going from Oakland, from San Francisco, otherwise, you're basically in the space of the truss the entire time. You don't really have a great view. Then you're in the tunnel. Then you're on the bottom end of the truss. It's not great. And so I wanted to create something that created space. That was very interesting. I didn't know how that was going to happen. And I also wanted to split the tower so that it had space for shadows, for light, for different effects. So do something else. And I have to tell you, when I said this to my engineering friends, that we wanted to split the tower in a high seismic zone, the back of their heads popped off. It completely went against all engineering philosophies, where up until then, all structures, especially in California, were built to resist Earth forces. They're to be robust, not to be flexible. And so what we started to do is we started looking at these things that were, I didn't know what a ductile link beam was, but the engineers did, coming up with these ideas of having these link beams that would allow the structure to be flexible and move. And the one thing that's, of the many, many things that's very spectacular about the Bay Bridge, is that it is designed to move and to break and predict where it breaks in a major event. And it's not made to resist everything. And so from that idea, if we can go to the next slide, these are some of my earlier sketches. I was working for a firm called H2L2 Architects at the time, and if you see the date here, it says from December 5th, 1997. And this is some of my first sketches on the idea of having the cables in the back span go to the outside, the cables to the inside, and the front go to the inside. And so this is the west side, this is the east side. So when you came out of the tunnel, you'd be in the space of the cables and they would transition to the front. This idea then translated into something that was split. I split the legs actually. So can we go to the next slide? The back of the tower had these legs that opened up like this, and this again is the west side, and this is the east side. The cables came from the outside to the tower and then back into the inside. Was looking at a lot of different ways to sculpt the tower. So these are some early sketches where we were showing some of the link beams, and we had the two halves and shaping the concrete and doing some really interesting things with the concrete. Again, this was a whole 6 days later. I went from that one sketch to this other sketch, and there's a bunch in between there. And can we go to the next one? And then we also developed another alternate where this is one of the models that's not out front, is where we had two main towers, and you could see these link beams throughout, and two shorter towers on the outside. And so we were trying to find different ways to break the structure down into multiple components. Can we go to the next one? How am I doing with time? Am I doing okay? Yeah. Okay, good. So these are actually not many people have seen these. These are actually the presentation boards we used to show to Caltrans when we were presenting our qualifications to be the final designers of the Bay Bridge. And so that one design that I showed you earlier developed into, I started looking at, the main span tower. This is longitudinally. This is as if you were driving across it. These are the skyway piers. And they were doing some studies on actually where to put the pedestrian path. At an early phase, we were looking at putting it below or a little bit below deck or at deck or above deck. And Don and Clive are actually going to talk a lot more about that a little bit later. Go to the next one. So this is how that split tower developed. There's two smaller towers on the outside, two taller towers on the inside. And we were playing with different cable arrangements and different things. So then after that, we were actually awarded the contract, and so we started working on the design. We'll go to the next one. And so one of the things we wanted to do is this one is called a portal frame. And this is the kind of the old engineering where this structure was designed to resist the Earth forces. This is a very, very robust structure, has 4 planes of cable. There are cables from each one of these towers. Each one of the roadways were supported independently. As you can see here, it's a very robust structure, but not very attractive. I mean, when you have 4 planes of cable like that, the views are kind of distorted, and we felt that it wasn't all that great. And you guys have to remember, these graphics are from 1998, so this is a long time ago. We'll go to the next one. The one that I showed you earlier with the split legs, with the legs, the cables to the outside and then to the inside, and those 4 legs. Well, our engineers started looking at that and putting it in a computer model, and it kept blowing up. It did not work at all. The earthquake forces were it just didn't work. And so So the engineering friend said, go back to the drawing board and come up with something else. And so what we started developing was the central tower. And the central tower did what we were looking for. It had the tower in the center and the cables to the outside, and it would create that very dramatic effect. And in the very beginning, you'll see this one is, I always call this one a ballerina with really fat ankles. It's got really, really chunky, but in the very beginning, we don't know a lot about the behavior, and so a lot of the times the structure is kind of bulkier and not that graceful. Thank you, I agree. And then can we go to the next one, please? So this is actually one of the models that you didn't see out there. This was the first model of the cable stay like this, and we had at this stage of the cable stay version, the ductile link beams were up in here, and these were more architectural. They weren't really functioning at all. And I had a concern about having these link beams that were exposed to the elements, out in the rain, all the other things that were going on. And so we worked on creating this glass enclosure at the top that would close them in. It could be lit at night. Really, really dramatic, really, really cool thing. And I remember the press and everything on SF Gate. People were afraid that they'd be driving across it in an earthquake and the glass would fall out. And I was always like, well, you're not afraid of that when you're in the city, when walking around the streets, when there's buildings with glass. You know, that doesn't happen. But that's a model you didn't see out there right now. Can we go to the next one? And then we started creating a lot of different images from the bike path. This guy's face is actually the guy who built all the computer models. He wanted to get his face in there, so he put his face. His name was Noam Ramadi. He put his face on there just so he'd be there forever. But you know, as the design was developing, we were getting more and more of the details. These are some of the cable anchorages and the railings, and getting to see some of the character. And here's a very happy bicyclist, and another one chasing him across the Bay Bridge. Go to the next one. This is just a detailed view of the model. Of a computer model showing you how the cable arrays would flare out, what the glass shield was going to be like. And it really accomplished everything that I wanted it to do. It had the split, it had the shadows, it had the articulation, it had the space, it had all those things that we set out to do. Go to the next one, please. We're also developing the Skyway piers, and this is very similar to what the Skyway piers look like today. And then this was the portal. This is the portal design, and this one, this one got a lot of attraction from an engineering standpoint. It was very easy to analyze. The cables were straight, the forces were straight, all those other things. But it was very difficult to get a lot of character out of this form. The other thing that was very difficult about it was you had two independent things that wanted to look like one thing, and so we struggled a lot with architecturally at the top how you could tie them together to make them look very interesting. And we had some reveals along the outside of the concrete that could be lit and create a lot of excitement that way. But in the end, can we go to the next one? There's some night views. Oh, and so in the end, so this is after the central pylon got developed a lot further. You could see how much more slender this is. We started playing with some diagonals, bracing on the exterior. It got a lot thinner and a lot more. The performance of this tower was extremely efficient, very, very efficient. And this is what it looked like from the deck. And so in the very end, we submitted 4 different designs. We had the portal design. We can just go to the next one. The self-anchored suspension bridge had another portal design as well. We'll go to the next one. We had the single pylon, and then we can go to the next one, and then the self-anchored suspension bridge. And ultimately, at the last, am I almost done? Yep. Okay. I'm going to be done now. I didn't even know you snuck up there. So I'm done, actually. So Don and Clive are going to continue talking about the self-anchored suspension bridge. I just wanted to show you a little bit about the early development.
Thanks, Michael Fitzpatrick, for taking us back down memory lane with some of those early designs. First of all, parents, thank you so much for bringing your kids out tonight. Tonight is actually historic. We haven't looked at some of these designs in years. Like I said before, those models haven't been unearthed for a decade. We're kind of retreading some old ground to bring back the Bay Bridge story tonight because we know we're just a few months away from opening this amazing span. The next 2 folks that are coming up are going to speak specifically about the bridge that was actually built and how we came up with that design. with no further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Clive and Don MacDonald. Here you go.
And I think this is a good overview of the whole bridge. And it was from touchdown to tunnel. That was the idea, to make the bridge read as one piece. And there's 5 different parts of this bridge. And those 5 different parts had to be all sort of read as one bridge. So we've done it by the light poles, the tower, and all the solids and voids that are in here. What's really interesting in design when you design bridges, and I use the Golden Gate as an example, is that the deck's usually about 1/3 of the height of the tower. And the reason that's done is when you put the deck in the middle of the tower, it cuts it in half. So this has started off with a very good placement of the deck. And then throughout the design, you'll see there's a 1/3 of the elements in the top, and there's 2/3 down here. They're not grouped the same way. And it's when you take a photograph and you put the horizon in the middle, you split it in half. And this way, it reads as a unit that's harmonic with its total. In the design, all the elements are interrelated. The 4-legged tower was set up because we wanted to get light through the middle of the tower to break it up, to break the massing down. So we had the slimmest tower possible. Same with the horizontal elements to make them very slender. So it's a very small, a minimum impact on the environment. So that's next slide. This is an animation. And just talking, see the touch at the tunnel here, it goes across, the deck splits into 2. Part of the design guideline was to have decks parallel to each other, and then a single tower came out of it. And you can see the link beams that Mike was talking about, and then the solids and voids that are matching up with the tower end in the deck. Here you can see the pieces of the tower have redundancy. The tower top and the link beams are covered with elements that are bigger than what's actually needed, and there's no structural. Here are the light poles that come into the spread out cable system, and it's really important. We wanted them to read as a strong line because it's a technology we use to get the bridge, or a design we used to get it to read as a unit. Howard Branson in New York had done a lot of that layout. Here's the added on bike rail that we put on, and there's a lot of elements on this that are quite interesting. I'll get to it when we see more detail. We tried to center everything on the piers that we could, belvederes, also these light poles, and all the elements in the handrail are related to the elements underneath the deck, and they're like cantilever arms. Also, you can see on the piers, the corners of the piers have pentagon shapes. Those are the same shapes you see on the main tower. You also see it in the light poles on the bridge. Those are pentagons as well. So you can see the idea of carrying this vocabulary throughout the bridge has been very important.
So I want to, first of all, I appreciate everybody turning out tonight as well. You've heard from Michael, you have Donald and I up here. There's another architect that worked on this bridge, Jay Mirza, that I want to recognize. He worked with us early on the design, not early with Don on the self-anchored suspension span, but he certainly was very involved as the bridge has evolved for the first few years, and early on actually in that skyway portion that wasn't received very well by the Bay Area, but I certainly want to recognize Jay. So I'm speaking now for a minute just to say that probably that Don and I have done a number of these presentations before, so we kind of go back and forth, and I hope it works pretty well for everyone. The game plan, if you will, I want to take you for a journey across the bridge, and Don and I will do our best to familiarize you with, explain to you how all these parts come together that Don's speaking about. So again, I think we all know where the project is. Michael explained it pretty well, but we want to take you on a journey across the bridge. We'll talk about the suspension span first. We'll talk about the skyway portion, and I think by the time we're done, you'll have a pretty clear understanding of how this bridge was put together, not only structurally, but how it was shaped and architecturally designed. We start with this great picture of the Bay Area, of this kind of rich history of the Bay Area bridges, with an image of the self-anchored suspension span in the foreground, the west spans here to the left leading into San Francisco, and the Golden Gate to the west. And I think the point of this slide right now is to talk more about, well, Michael did a great job explaining some of these early designs that we looked at early and EDAP looked at early in the design process, but how did we really get to the self-anchored suspension span? And Don, maybe you want to get into that.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that there's a necklace of bridges here, and they're catenary forms. A catenary form is like if you hold a string between your two fingers and give it some slack, that's called a catenary form. And so we have this element that ties all the bridges together as the main thing. The other thing is the tower height is the same as the tower height on the west spans. And the idea behind that was to tie that in as well. So it's a good idea so you can get to see how important this bridge is. And part of the other thing that we're pushing lately is the fact that it becomes a bridge for the East Bay and particularly Oakland. And we'll get into that a bit down the line next. And this is, I was saying about the horizontality and the vertical tower. If you look at nature, basically everything's horizontal just about. Horizons and trees are vertical, even buildings. So there's a certain nomenclature that exists. The other thing that's quite interesting is this bridge rises, as Mike was saying, the deepest part of this underside of the water is in this end, and it goes, so it sort of mimics what's underneath it. And this tower was moved earlier in our design to be over a better rock bed that's underneath it. And these piers that go down, they go down about 300 feet in stiff mud.
I think we have slides that explain that even better, why the tower was moved where it is. I want to mention just the bullet down below. A clean white line from shore to shore was always kind of a design parameter for this bridge from day one, was to create this clean white line from shore to shore. So that's been the challenge architecturally. Next. So this image is to talk then, we're going to start with the tower. So a great image of the tower and explain to you how the tower evolved into the shape and form that it is. Not only the tower itself, but the catenary form of the suspension span. So Don, you can speak to this slide and probably the next few.
Yeah, I think the idea, as I mentioned earlier, was to set up a vocabulary for the bridge. And one of the ways we do it is we take the tower in this particular case, which is the most complicated piece of engineering out there. And so I worked very closely with Herb Rothman. He and I together created this tower. I would do a sketch and I'd say, Herb, does this thing work? And he'd say, yeah, let's go with it. And that evolved from other designs you'll see in a minute, other sections through the tower. But the other thing that's very interesting about this is a self-anchoring suspension bridge. And the forces come down the cable, go into the deck. They're parallel to the deck here. There's two components, a vertical and a horizontal vector. Well, when you get down here, the vertical drops out, then it goes into compression. On the back, they couldn't get that design completely on that system, so they weighted it down with concrete. And the element that's below it is to hold it in place in case of an earthquake. So you can get an idea that this is balanced, even though the distances are different. The other thing is it's about a 1,000-foot span, and that's a span you need for boats, ships, I should say. If you make it any smaller, then it's one at a time that goes through it. So that was another reason the span was important. Yeah, here's an example that what we did to explain it to the public how this system works. In other words, this is the cable system, and it has a curve to it, and you'll even see it in the viaduct when we get a closer look. And then you see this is a concave curve and a convex curve, and so it starts to relate to the hills and the shape of what's around it. And so it's very important that this bridge became a family of the bridges in the Bay Area, but yet it had its own signature and it's had its own branding possibilities for the city of Oakland.
The important thing to note, number one, is that certainly the design of this bridge is driven by structural design and by geology that Michael mentioned before. And as he mentioned, most of the bay from this is the island, Yerba Island here, which is very solid rock. So we were able to found or produce a foundation within the rock on the island, but the rest of the bridge to the east is all mud, as he referred to. The other important thing you see here is that the bridge is, as it is in the current design, it's asymmetrical in form. Early in that design process, the single tower suspension span was symmetrical, Don, as I recall.
Right.
And we moved forward with this design.
Back to here. I think that it's a good point to bring out EDAP, which is a committee that was our peer review panel. They suggested we move it back. It'd be a more dramatic form, but also it'd create a foundation that was more stable. Out here, as I mentioned, these piers go into stiff mud. They go down 300 feet. And there's an old riverbed out here, and that's why it has a different configuration than the more shallow place. Here you can see how it hits the island. This is just, it's cut off, but the earlier designs, the reason we had 2 towers to begin with was the idea was to set the elevation on this one lower than this one, because when you go off the bridge, they wanted the roads to come together, and they wanted to start that difference in the bridge. So that was one of the reasons we had these 2 towers in the earlier designs. We did about 15 different tower designs and about 10 cable systems before we came up with this final solution. Next. And I think what's interesting, once they moved the tower back, it picked up the cranes in Oakland. The cranes are white, and this is actually a catenary form. There's not much of a curve in it, and then there's a backstay. And that sort of repeats its shape in the main span of the bridge. And I think it's really important that these were painted white. And I called up the maintenance people and said, why are they white? And they said, because if there's any rusting that goes on, we can see where it's going to happen. And this is the thing. Now, I was saying earlier, there's redundant parts on here. The tower top is redundant. It was a termination we designed. And here, these are link beams. These are the actual size of the link beams. They're actually, the covers are actually 2/3 bigger than this. And we felt the proportion was so small, it wasn't significant, so we enlarged them. And then we added a few more down here and a couple at the top. Now here's the process we went through. When we first started, we had a sort of a square tower. We actually had some in concrete. Then it got split into 2, like Michael was saying. They started looking at 2. And then we got it into 4. And then I felt at the time it was still too big and clumsy, so I started cutting the corners off. And again, I turned to Herb after I'd done the drawing. He says, Herb, is it going to work? He said, okay. So that's how it ended up there. And I did it because we wanted to get light into the middle of the tower to reduce the scale of it. Also, the way the sun works around the tower is dynamite, because it never looks like a flat surface. It's always spent. And then this shape became the dominating vocabulary throughout the whole bridge. The light poles, the piers had them on the corners, and so you'll see it as we go through it. Next. These are the kind of drawings we do, by the way, when we work with engineers. We rough them up, sketch them up. We don't do computer drawings till they sort of decide what they want, and then we go into 3D and fly-throughs and all that. But this is a process we've developed in our office over the last, because of the Bay Bridge 15 years ago.
And we even carried this faceted form, if you will, into the railing design of the bike path, which we'll talk about shortly.
And this shows you in detail how this is the tower leg itself. These are the link beams, or struts. There's different names. We call them link beams. And these are the outside skin. And these are the stiffeners on the inside of the tower. So they're hollow, and they're tapered as they go all the way up. And the reason we tapered the tower, not just for structural reasons, but if you look at the Golden Gate Bridge, or many of the famous bridges, the towers always taper as they go up or they step up. The reason for that is when your eye looks at 2 parallel lines at great heights, they sort of spread out because of the optical aspects of the lens. And so the idea is to try to pull it in as it rises, and that also makes it look higher than it really is. So this is a drawing that I did when I was trying to explain to in a stage of the design where when the tower legs were sloped on the inside face and there's solids and voids, that we followed that in the deck. It just worked out nicely. We could slope this, pick up the slope. We had the solids and voids, the cross beams, and this is a slide that Clive and I have used in trying to convince some people down the line on why these things are related. And they're quick sketches, but they're very important in conveying the idea without a lot of expense.
And I just add to that, since we're talking about Don's sketches, is that as I work in the day-to-day kind of design a theater, if you will, of this bridge, because it feels like theater a lot of the time, there's times where we're trying to convince our engineers, and I can't say enough about, having said convince our engineers, I can't say enough about toll bridge design, the engineers I work with from Caltrans, from our consultants, from our partners, MTC, CTC, and I really mean it. It's just a great team of people to work with. It's like a family after 16 years. I don't know if it feels like a family to Don, but some of my family is here. They would probably agree that I spend too much time with this family instead of at home. But my point earlier was that there's times that we really do want to drive home a point, and I call Don, and Don and I kind of meet on a weekly basis, and I said, geez, Don, I need a sketch, man, I need a sketch or something here. And he cranks these out pretty fast. So it's a great part of our kind of dynamics, if you will, and it's very productive.
Yeah, it's a low-cost treatment. Anyhow, the thing is that Clive brings up a good point. I'm not going to try to sell you on Caltrans, but I've worked in about 7, 8 different states. And in those states, I work with a lot of DOT, Department of Transportations. And Caltrans on this bridge in particular has been very transparent with the public. And it's given us an opportunity to come up with, I consider, really beautiful design. So anyhow, we'll take you through some more of it. Now, this is an important part. Now, remember I was saying earlier, I'll just talk in some detail. This is their rods that come down that tie this back part of this bridge. And it doesn't, all it does is stabilizes in case there's an earthquake. The other thing that's quite interesting, Bart even mentioned, I think alluded to, was the fact this bridge has a lot of innovation. This is the first cable that I know that wraps around the bridge itself. And we left this, we pulled the bike rail off so people could look at how the cable goes into this saddle. There's a saddle in here, there's another saddle here, there's one here, there's one at the top, and then there's 2 more on the east end of the anchorage. But we also lifted the bike path up, so there's an airspace underneath it. And the theory behind that was when the winds come in and blow, they'll go underneath and around it. So it's like an airplane wing, and this is sort of looks like a U-2 just about. But anyhow, the point is that the idea was to get that path separate from the autos because there's tremendous amount of cars. And as you know, car exhaust is heavier than air, so we felt it'd be some treatment. We don't know if it'll work, but at least we're going to try it, and it's the first time I know that it's been done. This is the tower again, and the link beams, and the redundant top, and the covers on the link beams are redundant because you can't see the actual working piece of structure. And then here you can see where we used the pentagon on the columns, and also there's a negative space in here. That negative space ties in with the tower. So again, it was bringing the solids and voids, which these are, and these are solids and voids up here, as you can see. And that helps to tie a uniform structure together.
I just add too, because when Don was describing the bike path and the separation to the superstructure, to the deck, long ago, he always referred to it, Don, as it was meant to float alongside the bridge. So I thought it was a great characterization, and you really see it in this image.
And the other thing that's interesting for us is the fact it is steel and it's painted white all the way to the touchdown, and that's important, that continuity of form and color. Next. This is, you know, you're on a car westbound and you're coming into the tunnel, and this shows you the barriers. It also shows you the link beams, and then this is the main cable. These are suspenders, and this cable is wrapped, and it's like the Golden Gate Bridge cable. It has 137 strands in it, and each strand has 128 wires, and there's 17,000. So it's a major feat, and it does carry the whole bridge. Around the tower base, there's a big void, and that's in case of an earthquake, that deck can move back and forth without hitting the tower. So it's sort of a freestanding here and doesn't attach to the deck, goes up, and all the forces take place up here and in the base of the tower. And like I mentioned earlier about the tower, why it's so important, here you can see the bike path again, and on it we'll show you some more pictures. We have a pattern on it, so the bicycle two-way traffic gets separated from the pedestrian, which is on the outer edge. This is another one, and you can see how the light poles are coming into the sort of open frame, and the idea here was to bring these light poles in, so when you're in a car, and you'll see it on the bridge, now they're close enough, so I won't say it's a wall, but it's a transparent sort of white element. And when you're driving along where you're really next to them, you'll see how this piece goes right into the center of the bridge and the tower. Things that Clive might talk a bit about the lighting. We've got 7 fixtures on the last light poles, and there's 7 elements up here. So as you go through the light poles, they go 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then that ties it into the top piece. And again, I mentioned we work in thirds all the time when we can. This is a third of the height of the tower. These light poles are a third of the whole light post itself.
And we will talk a lot more about lighting. So
Yeah.
Next slide, I think we start to talk about the Skyway. So just let me add right here, Don, or kind of move through this journey. The idea was to communicate to you how the main tower works, how the main span works, but then once you understand the architecture, that architectural vocabulary, all that is carried in to the rest of the bridge. So the point of this slide, it's a little hard for me to see from this angle, but the bridge is, the challenge architecturally, again, was that this bridge is made up of a number of different structure types. This is the steel main span, or SAS, that we just described. Then there's the main approach viaduct, which we refer to the Skyway, which is actually a segmentally constructed concrete structure. both ends of the bridge, the Oakland touchdown and the YBI transition structure. We'll talk about those as well, but those are cast in place concrete structures. So the challenge architecturally then was to provide an architectural solution that unifies these 4 different structure types into one unified whole. I believe we're going to take then an aerial view of the Skyway, Don. I think I can talk real briefly about it initially. This is the Skyway or viaduct portion. Again, the first thing you notice is it's 2 side-by-side decks that we've talked about earlier. The thing I want to point out is if you think about the current bridge, it's a double-deck structure. And that was a real advantage to this bridge visually, architecturally, and if you will, experientially. In other words, when you're on the existing double-deck structure and you're on the lower deck traveling eastbound, if you will, to Oakland, or in this way in this slide, you're basically in a big steel cage. You really don't have views out to Oakland East Bay, and you'll see them in the next few slides. But now with the side-by-side structures, that will afford us just incredible views towards the East Bay, as well as to the west when you travel north. And I won't get into it too much for the sake of moving forward, but we looked at a number of different alignments for this bridge overall, which we haven't talked about much in the early design. And we chose this northern alignment, number one, for geology, for foundation reasons, but it also afforded great views traveling westbound towards the north, Mount Tam, the Golden Gate Bridge, the skyline, and so on. The next thing, I think, when we talk about the vocabulary, Don's explained the tower, the self-anchored suspension span, but that pentagonal form is carried into the Skyway piers. He's already mentioned the light poles parade their way down through the spine or center of the bridge, so it helps to unify the structure overall, and even that pentagonal form or faceted form is carried into the railings.
Yeah, no, this is the viaduct itself, and as I mentioned to you before, we got the engineers to hold this depth so it would be the same as the depth of the main span, which is consistent. This is the arch part that's below it, and it goes down at each haunch. It has a haunch, and it comes in a big curve like that from the side elevations. Here you can see the bike path, how it's elevated a bit, and it gives you an idea. It's sort of an add-on. And when on the main span, what's interesting, you can't see here, but on the main span, they've got ballast on the other side to balance that bike path. So, yeah, here's the pier again. Here's one of our drawings that we're using to illustrate on how this thing works, and you can see the shape of the leg. This is the corner of the pier. They're hollow. And then you can see the recess that picks up the negative space in the main tower, and we point that out over here. This is a light pole. This is the shape of the light pole. If you go out there, you'll see it now. And these are the lenses on top. This happens to be a pole that only has 4 fixtures, but the final pole, the closest to the tower, has 7, like I mentioned earlier. And here you can get a good example of how the light poles and the piers and even the pier caps down here take up this particular shape. They reinforce the pier shape itself. And you'll see that if you go out there. And the bike path, of course, is on this side. This is the south side, and that's the north side. And here's the bike path. And you can see how there's 3 lanes of traffic. It's 15 feet wide, 2-way for bicycles and a pedestrian. We have outlooks that are along the bike path. We have special lighting at we call them belvederes, and some call them overlooks. But you can see this, how we change the pattern where you get to the belvedere so the people on the bikes are aware that it's a standing area. And it's wheelchair accessible, as you can see by that. And these are special light poles that just light this area. There's lighting in the handrail itself that shines on the path, and it's enough light out there so you can have facial recognition.
The other thing I might add, it's a minor detail, but there was always a desire to provide benches within these belvederes. So 5 belvederes located on the Skyway and 2 additional belvederes located on the main span. I just note that we kind of transitioned into the bike path because you're out in the middle of the bridge right now, and we want to explain a few of the elements on the bridge, such as the bike path. We'll talk about the lighting briefly, a little bit about color, and then we'll move forward into both touchdowns of the bridge at the island and to the Oakland touchdown. So let's see, Don, I'll go through a couple slides. Yeah. We're going to talk a little bit about the railing design. In it, you can see these, what we call divider rails, that break up this overall linear. Remember, this bridge is very long. This bridge is over 2 miles long, 2.2 miles long, and especially the skyway portion is very straight. So the desire was to break up this long linear line, and we'll explain that a little in the next slide.
Yeah, let me just cut in on here a little bit, Clive, is that when we design bridges, we design for 3 different speeds. The speed of a car, and that means you can't have a lot of small details. To give you an example, if you're going 50 miles an hour and you come up on a roadway sign, you can't read it because you're going too fast. That means the sign's not big enough. So that's one scale we work at. The next was if you're on a bike, and a bike goes up to, say, 15 to 18 miles an hour, so you see another scale. And we have elements like these particular elements relate to that. And then we have walkers who go 3 miles an hour, or in that range. And so you'll find that there's elements on the bridge that relate to each of those scales. And that's part of designing a bridge, so as Clive said, there's a process of user-friendly elements to it that adapt to those 3 scales. And here's the bike path again. I mentioned before how we had this space, and it's aerodynamically designed so the wind will come down and through it, also goes over it. And this is also aerodynamically designed. The edge of the viaduct, which matches up with the main span, which had to be shaped that way because of the wind.
So another important part of this slide then is to, we saw that picture looking up through the self-anchored suspension span where we talked about the bike path floating alongside. And Don, I know you worked hard to provide this. It's about a 1.5-foot gap between the roadway barrier and the bike path itself. And then we raised it above the deck level as well to provide kind of what we refer to here, kind of this pedestrian scale experience. You were separated from the roadway.
And another thing, when we did this, we were going to take it even higher, but they wanted, the bicyclist coalition people wanted eye contact with cars in case there's an accident or something on the bike path or some problem. Then they won't feel that they're not under some kind of overview of the drivers if there's help needed. This just shows you the pattern of the bike path. Here you can see, I don't know if you can see at the bottom in the lower right-hand part of the screen, but you can see the 2 lanes of traffic. You can see the pattern we use. We put elements, the same color as the bike path, but for walkers, and then the bike path has a different scale to it. And of course, the roadway has another one. And you can see same thing up here. You might want to add something.
Well, no, simply that we're dividing the pedestrian and bicyclist by color. This is the belvederes that we've been talking about. Again, you can see the pier shape, pentagonal, and they're basically 40 feet long. They break up that long scale of the path. This is the railing design, which was real important to work. We worked with BCDC, Bay Conservation Development Commission, Design Review Board, an important part of the overall design of the bridge. They were very concerned about the transparency of this bicycle path so that motorists looking out to views could look through it. So we chose a vertical picket railing, the divider rail as I talked about, and I think, Don, one of the most important things was if you look at the divider rails, they're just not placed at random, but rather they pick up on the structural elements that support these cantilever beams that support the bike path from underneath are carried into the railing design and carried over into the pathway paving coloring that Don talked about earlier.
Okay, here's what's important. This is on the west end, and this wraps around the saddle. In other words, the cable comes down. Let's see. Yeah, cable comes down, goes into the saddle. This is on the west end. I mean, I'm sorry, in the east end. And so we pulled the deck off so you could actually look down at the water. You're free of the deck, the main span, and this is where the cable comes into the deck. And as I mentioned earlier, it becomes parallel to the deck, and then it forces the deck into compression. And this is that belvedere that you saw earlier from the underside, and these are the bike path and the pedestrian path.
Okay, this next image then is the western side of the self-anchored suspension span, the belvedere,
yeah. And you can see
the cable tying through.
The cavity's open, and you can look down at the saddle that's in there. And we felt that was a good place to put a belvedere, so it could be an area of conversation and talk about structure, and this would be a good part to next.
And certainly a place, these belvederes are a place to pause, to rest. This bridge rises almost 200 feet above the water from land on the Oakland shore. So for pedestrians, bicyclists, we wanted to create that place to pause and rest. Lighting is an important part of this bridge design, just as it's very important how this bridge appears during the day. It's equally important how you experience a bridge at night. Caltrans and the design team recognized early on that lighting was important. We retained one of the foremost lighting designers in the country, Howard Branston, to design the lighting. He'd done the Statue of Liberty and a number of other high-profile projects around the country. We worked with Howard throughout the early part of the design, but I mention these firms because they were so important as we moved on. And the point, what I'm trying to get here is that we've been working on the design of this bridge for a long time now. Certainly for me, the last 10, 12 years. And technology has changed. Lighting technology has changed. We started with what was called metal halide lighting, which gave us the white light we wanted. But now with the advent of LED lighting, we want to move into the 21st century, which is what this bridge is all about. So we really worked with Musco Lighting back in Iowa, with Valmont Lighting, with Valmont poles. The poles themselves, I can tell you structurally, are a challenge, and I'll just leave it at that for an introduction. Real quickly then, the bridge is meant to glow at night, as it states up here in the bullets. Howard Branston always referred to it as an orchestrated event, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But real quickly, the self-anchored suspension span then is, the idea is to emphasize the geometry of the structure, to accentuate the height of the tower and the openness of the tower. The other thing about the lighting, and Don, you can butt in when you want here, cut in, or we're a team, is that the idea was
I've been on longer than him.
The idea then is that, very important to the lighting, is that we didn't want to call out the source of the light. We wanted to essentially minimize the appearance of the source of the light. So in the roadway lighting itself and on the SAS lighting, the lighting on the roadway is downstream of the viewer, and you'll understand that more in the next few slides.
On the cables, and the idea was to light the cable at night, so it's like a veil of light. So when you come from the tunnel and you go through it heading towards East Bay, you really get a sense of you're entering another space in the bay. And so we had a test, and we have lights at the base here. There's a light on either side of these 4 suspender cables that go all the way up. And there's the marker lights on the top, and those marker lights are picked up by the vertical lights along the skyway. So you get this idea, these small dots, and they climb up the cable when you come to the end of the vertical street lights, so to speak. So anyhow, this is an example of the test we did. It was photographed, and we're using it tonight because Musco has been very good at working with us. It's the first time they've worked on a bridge. I work in a lot of bridges throughout the United States, and we're using them a lot now because they're the first ones to get into LEDs. And there's been a lot of lessons learned on this, and that's one of the reasons they're so important at the time.
This is an important slide in the overall design of the lighting. It's just meant to talk about this orchestrated event that Howard Branston referred to earlier. Don and I both talked about the desire architecturally is to tie all these bridge types together, and certainly at night we need to do that with lighting as well. So the idea is that when you look at the roadway lighting, it's a series of poles, of light poles that increase in height as they approach the main span. So the idea is that, if you will, it's kind of like a crescendo in music that builds from each end of the bridge and terminates at the top of the tower. So the light poles increase in height. If you will, the grand finale of this piece of music then terminates at the top of the tower.
This is a good example of how Howard visualized it first. This is his first schemes. And we changed this when we went to LEDs. We had to make this 7 lights, 7 fixtures above the pole, and it went to 6, 5, 4, and 3. And so when you go out on the bridge, you'll see this count rise. And like Clive just mentioned, we were able to tie it into the top of the tower, so at a distance, there'll be that relationship. And again, we changed this dimension. In fact, when we went to LEDs, we got to be this a third, like I said, of the proportion of the pole, which is a thing that I usually go for in bridges. One of the reasons I use that is geometry is very important in bridge design. These bridges have to last 100, 150 years. And so if you get it too stylistic or you don't follow certain basic aesthetic guidelines, then it doesn't have the longevity that it should. Here's another sketch we did to explain how the pole and that relates to the elements on the top of the tower and the link beams. and then how it also, the pole, the time we're having a recess in the pole, the light pole, and at the top, at one time we had a track that would go up, and it was a way to change the lights. You can bring them down the track and put them back up again. You know, and you can see how the recess in here and then the recess between the main tower, this were all important elements that tie this together.
So I just have to note that the important part was, yeah, is that as technology evolved and we worked on the lighting design, we didn't really need this recess in the pole anymore, but Don and I felt really strongly that it was part of the architecture, part of the vocabulary. And if you will, we had to convince our team that we wanted to retain this recess. And just real quick images then of the light poles in the skyway. I can't tell you, when we worked with Valmont back in Iowa, I was fortunate to get to go a number of times, but I just kept emphasizing over and over, you have to understand how important these light poles are to this bridge design, not just at night for lighting the deck, but how important they are during the daytime. So they're meant to provide an even wash of lights, even wash of light. You can see that the poles are located to the interior edge of each deck, and the fixtures themselves are actually downstream of your line of sight.
I think what's important here is this wall of posts that become very important in tying this bridge together, because what happens above the deck is as important as what happens below aesthetically. So this gave us an opportunity to really tie it together. Some more of the bike path. You can see the pattern that we use for pedestrians and the bicycle. Again, the fact that we have a round rail on the top picks up the roundness of the cable and the suspenders, and then these are the collars that go around it. And then it's wrapped again. We get into detail if you want, but you can see how we have 7 fixtures at the top of the pole, and then you see the 7 up here.
This is an image then of the skyway, what I was just talking about earlier, how important are for a motorist experience as they travel down the skyway. This is very important to the bridge design. This is the bike path at night. It's lit. We light the bike path just as we did with the roadway. We accentuate the belvederes. This is the same slide you saw before, but we're going to talk briefly about color. The bridge is meant to be white. It's a bridge. It was always meant to be a bridge of the 21st century. If you will, white kind of speaks to new birth and new life. It also accentuates shade and shadow in the pylons and the tower that Don worked so hard to shape.
Another thing to remember, when you use white, it's not a stylistic color. In other words, if you remember back in the 50s, you get an avocado refrigerator or something like that. If you want to keep that problem out of the way, you go to white or black.
to the cranes, and the tower cranes are so evident. There's such a strong visual presence on the shore of Oakland in the East Bay. We're trying to tie this bridge to Oakland and the East Bay, and it really works with that. Next. So we're at each end of the bridge part. We're almost there. We'll roll through these slides real quick of how do you connect the bridge at the YBI end, the Yerba Buena Island end, as well as the Oakland touchdown. So an overview of Yerba Buena Island, Treasure Island. Next. I'm just going to roll through it. This is the transition structure that you can see. It's called transition because, remember, we're 2 side-by-side decks that have to transition over each other, become a double-deck bridge that will tie in to the tunnel to the west spans in the distance. There's a lot went into the design of this bridge structurally. What I remember in the early design was it was always touched lightly on the island. There's a lot of history on the island, the Great White historic structures, the Coast Guard base. We wanted to minimize the impact to the island as much as possible. The other thing you see here is the eastbound on-ramp from the island up to the bridge heading to Oakland. What this image doesn't show, and I won't get into it, other than to say that we're working with the city of San Francisco to provide a new westbound off-ramp that will take place just after the SAS peel off onto the island, as well as provide a westbound on-ramp.
Yeah, what's interesting there is it was added later, so there's structurally it's a very refined design because we had to tie it into the vocabulary of this bridge. And in doing it, we had to go to fiberglass elements and things like that. So it's going to be interesting. It's a very complicated part of the bridge, by the way.
This is the bike path again to the southern edge. This is where the bike path terminates. So the next couple slides are going to talk more about the bike path landing. Next. So this is the bike path as it ascends down and meets grade. Just as we have belvederes along the length of the bridge, we really want to emphasize this is your first experience with a bridge as a bicyclist pedestrian as you get off the island and onto the bridge. So it's kind of a staging area, a plaza area, great views towards the main tower and our new bridge. We also provide ADA access, an ADA access pathway towards a bus stop over here on the island, separated pathway, Southgate Road. It also required the widening of Southgate Road on the island. Large retaining walls. We provided relief along the face of these retaining walls to break up this large face. It's reminiscent of the same way we treated the viaduct structure up on the viaduct portion of the bridge as well.
Just as a quick design thing, we go to a rib system, and the reason we do that is it picks up shadow different than the plain wall does, so it recesses itself and sort of emphasizes depth at the same surface.
I think we'll go to Oakland touchdown, and we're almost ready to blow through this. This is an aerial view then. In the left is the Skyway or Oakland touchdown portion of our bridge as it lands on Oakland shore. So very important how we make that landing, how we make that connection. You can see the green portion in the bottom of the screen, and I think this was an important offshoot of the bridge design, and that is that all the designers, including those in PCDC, DRB, EDAP, recognize that this is a great opportunity to create this gateway to Oakland with a new park at this location. When we started the project, Don and I, and Don before me, but this was part of the Oakland Army base. It was always a refuge area, if you will. I remember tanks running up and down it. So we have studies in progress right now. There's a team working on the design of Gateway Park. This is a view looking west then as you approach the landing at the Oakland shore. We always recognize that we wanted to define the beginning and end of the bridge, and that we do that with a line of trees down the median of the bridge. We chose Canary Island date palm. It's reminiscent of the palm trees that exist on the Embarcadero in San Francisco, so it kind of bookends the Bay Bridge, if you will, east spans and west spans, but primarily they're a vertical element, if you will. They pick up on that spine of light poles as they parade their way down onto the Oakland shore. They're very adapted to the harsh climate of the Oakland shoreline out here, and as well, they're very transparent because views were important.
Yeah, this is an example where we're trying to bring, or we are bringing the vocabulary of the bridge into the, and we designed the skin of this building. The interior was not by us, and we had an influence on the canopy, the new canopy, so it has horizontal elements in it which are very strong in the bridge, but also when you have movement in cars driving by quickly, you pick up that element. So these buildings are all white as well. And so it's again creating a whole gateway and carrying through a vocabulary and color that's just consistent with the rest of the main span.
So this is an image looking more like a plan view of Gateway Park as it's evolving. You can see we're starting up to loosen up the pathways through here, create a park-like experience. And in the next slide, you get an image of how this bike path could eventually peel off to the south and become part of Gateway Park and invite people onto the bridge, invite people from Oakland, the East Bay, out to this park. I can tell you there's incredible vistas out here to the west looking towards San Francisco skyline. So go ahead, Don, because this is the last slide.
This is the last slide, and I just want to repeat again, this is the bridge down your lower right-hand corner, and you can see the suspension shape and how it picks up the bridges. What's interesting is this side of the Golden Gate is always highlighted, and the other side is hidden in the with the hill behind the Marin Headlands, and so it does kind of bring up this piece. So when you go out there, just take a look at it.
I think there's one more slide, which is just a brief animation. This is the way our bridge is going to look, and it stops too abruptly, but enjoy it. That's it.
All right. Thanks, Don, Clive.